Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a rancher who found an Apache girl freezing at the edge of his land. Samuel Carter discovered little Aiyana abandoned after a brutal cavalry raid that destroyed her entire family. But the outcome exceeded all expectations. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening to this story from. Chapter 1. A Cry in the Cold. A bitter Montana wind cut through Samuel Carter's wool coat like a knife as he rode the fence line of his sprawling cattle ranch. November had brought an early winter to the territory, and thick snow clouds gathered overhead, promising another brutal night ahead. At 48, Samuel had weathered enough Rocky Mountain winters to read the signs. This storm would be a killer. His breath formed white clouds in the frigid air as he checked the last section of fence before heading home. The cattle had been moved to the lower pastures weeks ago, but Samuel made these rounds religiously. Predators grew desperate when snow covered their usual hunting grounds, and a damaged fence could mean losing valuable livestock to wolves or mountain lions. Wind suddenly shifted, carrying with it a sound that made Samuel's blood freeze. A child's cry, faint but unmistakably human, coming from somewhere near the timber line at the edge of his property. Samuel reined in his horse, straining to listen over the howling wind. There it was again, weak, desperate, barely audible above the storm. Without hesitation, he spurred his mount toward the sound, his heart pounding with dread and determination. As he crested a small rise, Samuel spotted a dark shape huddled against a fallen pine tree about 50 yards away. The figure was small, motionless except for barely perceptible breathing that sent tiny puffs of vapor into the freezing air. Snow had already begun to accumulate on what appeared to be a child's form. "Sweet Jesus," Samuel muttered, dismounting. Quickly and running through the knee-deep snow. It was an Apache girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, curled into a tight ball against the base of the tree. Her traditional dress was torn and inadequate for the harsh weather, and her lips had turned an alarming shade of blue. Frostbite had already claimed the tips of her fingers, and her small body shook uncontrollably with violent shivers. "Little one," Samuel said gently, kneeling beside her and speaking in the few Apache words he'd learned during his years on the frontier. "Can you hear me?" The girl's dark eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with hypothermia. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak whimper before her eyes rolled back. Samuel didn't hesitate. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around the child's frozen form, then lifted her carefully into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her body so cold it felt like holding a bundle of ice. "Hold on, sweetheart," he whispered, carrying her to his horse. "We're going to get you warm." The ride back to the ranch house seemed to take forever. Samuel held the girl close against his chest, sharing what body heat he could while urging his horse through the deepening snow. Every few minutes he checked to make sure she was still breathing, terrified that he might be too late. The sprawling log cabin that served as the main house finally came into view, smoke rising from its stone chimney like a beacon of hope. Samuel had built this place with his own hands 15 years ago, when he'd first claimed this land. It was designed to withstand the brutal Montana winters, with thick walls and a massive stone fireplace that could heat the entire structure. "Martha!" Samuel shouted as he kicked open the front door. "Martha, I need help." His wife emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. Martha Carter was a sturdy woman of 45, with graying brown hair and the kind of practical competence that frontier life demanded. Her eyes widened when she saw the bundle in Samuel's arms. "Good Lord, what happened?" "Found her freezing at the timber line," Samuel explained, carrying the girl toward the fireplace. "Apache child, near death from exposure." Martha's face showed no surprise or hesitation. She'd seen enough tragedy on the frontier to understand that survival trumped politics. Get her by the fire. I'll fetch blankets and warm water." Samuel gently laid the unconscious girl on the thick rug in front of the blazing fireplace. In the warm light, he could see her condition more clearly, and his heart clenched with concern. Besides the obvious hypothermia, she showed signs of exhaustion and hunger. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her cheeks were hollow with malnutrition. Martha returned with an armload of wool blankets and a basin of warm water. "We need to warm her gradually," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "Too much heat too fast could kill her." Working together, they carefully removed the girl's wet, inadequate clothing and wrapped her in dry blankets. Martha began gently warming the child's hands and feet with damp cloths, while Samuel added another log to the fire. "She's just a baby," Martha murmured, brushing snow-dampened black hair away from the girl's face. "What's an Apache child doing alone out here?" Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors of cavalry raids in the mountains, stories of Apache camps being attacked and scattered. The thought of this innocent child being abandoned in such conditions filled him with rage. "Doesn't matter right now," he said grimly. "Right now, we just focus on keeping her alive." For the next hour, they worked in shifts, monitoring the girls, breathing and slowly raising her body temperature. Martha prepared warm broth, while Samuel kept the fire burning hot. Gradually, color began to return to the child's lips, and her breathing became more regular. As the evening wore on, the girls' eyes finally opened again. This time, they were clearer, more focused, though still clouded with fear and confusion. She looked around the unfamiliar room, taking in the warm firelight, the log walls, and the two concerned faces watching over her. When she tried to sit up, Martha gently pressed her back down. "Easy, little one. You're safe now." The girl's eyes darted between Samuel and Martha, clearly trying to understand where she was and whether these strangers meant her harm. Samuel could see the intelligence behind her gaze, as well as a wariness that no child should have to possess. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Martha asked softly, her voice carrying the gentle tone she'd once used with her own children before. "Fever took them years ago." The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out. She swallowed hard and tried again. "Aiyana," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Aiyana," Samuel repeated carefully. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Samuel, and this is Martha. You're in our home, and you're safe." Tears began to flow down Aiyana's cheeks as the warmth and kindness overwhelmed her. Whatever she'd endured before finding herself frozen at the edge of Samuel's land, it had clearly been traumatic beyond measure. Martha offered her a cup of warm broth, helping her take small sips. "Slow now. Your stomach needs time to adjust." As Aiyana drank, Samuel studied her face. She was beautiful even in her weakened state, with the high cheekbones and intelligent dark eyes characteristic of her people. But there was something in her expression, a deep sadness that spoke of terrible loss. Outside, the wind howled with increasing fury, and snow began pelting against the windows. The storm Samuel had predicted was arriving in full force, and he shuddered to think what would have happened if he hadn't found Aiyana when he did. "Can you tell us what happened?" Samuel asked gently. "How did you come to be alone out there?" Aiyana's eyes filled with fresh tears, and she clutched the blanket tighter around her small form. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of unimaginable tragedy. "Soldiers came," she whispered. "They burned everything." Chapter 2. Broken Memories. 3 days had passed since Samuel found Aiyana frozen at the edge of his land. The storm had raged for 2 nights, dumping nearly 3 feet of snow across the Montana Territory. Inside the warm cabin, the Apache girl was slowly recovering her strength, though the trauma in her dark eyes remained. Martha had taken to the child immediately. Her maternal instincts awakened after years of dormancy. She'd lost 2 children to scarlet fever a decade ago, and caring for Aiyana seemed to fill a void that had never properly healed. "Eat slowly, sweetheart," Martha encouraged, offering Aiyana another spoonful of venison stew. The girl ate mechanically, as if food was merely fuel rather than comfort. Samuel watched from his chair by the fire, whittling a small wooden horse. He'd noticed how Aiyana's eyes followed his hands as he worked, showing the first real interest she'd displayed since arriving. "Do you like horses?" he asked gently. Aiyana nodded slightly. "My father had horses, before ... before the soldiers came." The girl's face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Martha immediately moved to comfort her, wrapping strong arms around the small, trembling form. Samuel set down his whittling. "Aiyana, can you tell us what happened? We want to help, but we need to understand." After several minutes, Aiyana found her voice. "We were camped in the hidden valley. My father said it was safe there, protected by the mountains." Her words came. Slowly, painfully, the blue coats came at dawn. So many of them. They had big guns that made thunder. Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors of cavalry units conducting unauthorized raids, claiming they were pursuing hostiles, but often attacking peaceful camps. Captain Morrison led them, Aiyana continued, her voice barely a whisper. He had yellow hair and angry eyes. He said we were harboring warriors, but we only had old men and children. Martha's grip on the girl tightened protectively. "What happened to your family?" "My grandmother tried to show them our peace treaty papers. Morrison burned them. Then ... Aiyana's voice broke completely. Samuel knelt beside her chair. "You don't have to tell us everything now, when you're ready." But Aiyana seemed desperate to share her burden. "They killed everyone. Grandmother, my little brother, my cousins. I hid in the root cellar like father taught me." The words tumbled out in a rush, as if holding them back was causing physical pain. "When the shooting stopped, I stayed hidden until dark, and I came out, and then they were all gone." "How did you survive alone?" Martha asked softly. "Father always said if something happened, walk toward the big mountains. Find the white man's ranch with the red barn. He said the man there was honorable." Samuel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. His barn was painted red, visible for miles across the valley. Somehow, Aiyana's father had known about him, had trusted him enough to send his daughter here in desperate times. "How long were you walking?" 4 days, maybe 5. I ate berries and snow, slept in caves when I could find them." The thought of this small child walking alone through hostile wilderness for nearly a week made Samuel's blood boil. She could have died a dozen different ways: exposure, wild animals, starvation. "You're incredibly brave," he said simply. Aiyana shook her head. "I was scared every moment." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Martha said wisely. "It means you keep going despite the fear." Over the following days, more details emerged. Aiyana's band had been peaceful, trying to live quietly in the mountains, while avoiding the conflicts that plagued other tribes. Her father, Running Wolf, had been a respected leader who'd consistently advocated for peace with settlers. "He met you once," Aiyana told Samuel one evening. "At the trading post in Cedar Falls, he said you were different from other white men, fair in your dealings." Samuel vaguely remembered the encounter, a dignified Apache man who traded furs for supplies, without the hostility that marked most such interactions. The fact that Running Wolf had remembered him, had trusted him enough to direct his daughter here, was both humbling and heartbreaking. As Aiyana grew stronger, she began helping with small chores around the house. Martha taught her basic English words, while Aiyana shared Apache phrases in return. The cultural exchange seemed to comfort both woman and child. but Samuel noticed troubling signs. Aiyana rarely slept through the night, often waking with muffled screams from nightmares. She startled at sudden noises and positioned herself where she could always see the exits. The trauma ran deep. One morning, Sheriff Tom Wilson arrived on horseback, his face grim with purpose. Samuel met him on the porch, not wanting to alarm Aiyana. "Samuel, I heard you might be harboring an Apache child." "Found her freezing to death on my land," Samuel replied evenly. "Couldn't very well leave her to die." Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "There's been pressure from the territorial government. They want all Apache children sent to the reservation schools." "She's been through enough." "I understand, but the law says nothing about helping a dying child," Samuel interrupted. "Besides, what's left of her family?" Wilson sighed. "That's what I came to tell you. Found the camp Morrison hit. 15 dead, including women and children. Completely unauthorized action. He's been relieved of command pending investigation." Samuel felt sick. "So she really is alone." "Appears so. But the territorial authorities still want her relocated." Through the window, Samuel could see Aiyana helping Martha prepare bread, her small hands working the dough with careful concentration. For the first time since arriving, she looked almost like a normal child. "How long do I have?" "Week, maybe?" 2. Morrison's got all eyes who are pushing for quick resolution. After Wilson left, Samuel sat heavily in his chair. The thought of sending Aiyana to a government school, where she'd be forced to abandon her culture and language, felt like a betrayal of her father's trust. That evening, he shared the news with Martha and Aiyana. The girl listened with the stoic acceptance of someone who'd already lost everything. "Will they hurt me there?" she asked quietly. Samuel's throat tightened. "I won't let that happen." "But if the law says—" "Sometimes the law is wrong," Samuel said firmly. "Your father trusted me to keep you safe. I intend to honor that trust." Aiyana studied his weathered face, seeing something there that gave her hope for the first time in weeks. "What will you do?" Samuel looked at Martha, who nodded encouragingly. "We're going to make you part of this family. Legally, officially, permanently. Is that possible?" "We'll make it possible," Martha said with determination, "one way or another." Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside the warm cabin, 3 people began planning a future together, one that would require courage, determination, and perhaps a little defiance of unjust laws. Chapter 3. Fighting for Family. 2 weeks later, Samuel stood in Judge Harrison's chambers in Cedar Falls, his hat in his hands and determination etched across his weathered face. The elderly judge reviewed the adoption papers with careful attention, occasionally glancing at Aiyana, who sat quietly beside Martha. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Carter," Judge Harrison said, adjusting his spectacles. "Adopting an Apache child during current territorial tensions." "She's an orphan with nowhere else to go," Samuel replied firmly. "My wife and I can provide a stable home." The judge studied Aiyana thoughtfully. In the 2 weeks since the sheriff's visit, she'd continued to recover physically and emotionally. Martha had sewn her proper winter clothing, and the hollow look in her eyes had been replaced by cautious hope. "Young lady," Judge Harrison addressed her directly, "do you understand what adoption means?" Aiyana nodded solemnly. "It means Samuel and Martha become my family. They protect me and teach me." "And you want this?" "Yes, sir. They saved my life." Before the judge could respond, the chamber door burst open. Captain Morrison strode in, his blond hair disheveled and his blue uniform wrinkled. Despite being relieved of command, he still carried himself with military arrogance. "Your Honor, I object to these proceedings," Morrison declared. "That child is a ward of the territorial government." Judge Harrison frowned. "Captain, you have no standing in this courtroom. You're currently under investigation. A Apache must be contained, Morrison insisted, his voice rising. This bleeding heart sympathy will only encourage more savage behavior. Samuel stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. Watch your mouth when speaking about my daughter. Your daughter? Morrison laughed harshly. She's Apache scums. Family got what they deserved. The words hung in the air like poison. Aiyana's face went pale, and Martha instinctively pulled her closer. Captain Morrison, Judge Harrison said coldly, you will remove yourself from my chambers immediately, or I'll have you arrested for contempt. Morrison's face flushed red, but he backed toward the door. This isn't over. The territorial government won't stand for Indian-loving traitors. After Morrison left, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Judge Harrison set down the papers and looked directly at Samuel. Mr. Carter, you understand the challenges you'll face? There are people who won't accept an Apache child in a white family. Let them try to take her, Samuel said quietly. They'll have to go through me first. The judge nodded slowly. The paperwork appears to be in order. However, I'll need character. Witnesses and a home inspection. Over the next few days, neighbors and friends testified on Samuel's behalf. Doc Miller spoke about Samuel's integrity. Preacher Johnson praised his Christian charity. Even some of the ranch hands vouched for his character. The home inspection went smoothly. The ranch was prosperous and well maintained, with plenty of space for a growing family. Martha had already prepared a bedroom for Aiyana, complete with handmade furniture and warm quilts. But their biggest challenge came from an unexpected source. I'm sorry, Samuel, Sheriff Wilson said, standing awkwardly in the Carter kitchen. Orders came down from the territorial capital. All Apache children are to be transferred to the Carlisle Industrial School in Pennsylvania. Aiyana looked up from her primer, fear creeping back into her dark eyes. What's that? Martha's face hardened. It's a place where they try to make Indian children forget they're Indian. I won't go, Aiyana said quietly, but with steel in her voice. I'd rather die in the mountains. Samuel felt his protective instincts flare. She's not going anywhere. Samuel, I have a federal warrant, Wilson said reluctantly. My hands are tied. Then you'll have to arrest me too. The standoff stretched tense moments. Wilson was a fair man caught between duty and conscience. He'd seen enough frontier justice to know when something was wrong. I can give you 24 hours, he said finally. But after that, ... That evening, Samuel called an emergency meeting with his foreman and trusted ranch hands. These were hard men who'd worked the Montana frontier for years, and they understood loyalty. Boys, they want to take Aiyana away, Samuel announced. Send her to some government school back east where they'll try to break her spirit. That ain't right, said Jake Morrison, the lead wrangler. Little girl's been through enough. What do you need from us, boss? Asked Miguel Santos, the ranch foreman. Samuel looked around at the weathered faces of men who'd become his extended family. If federal marshals come, I need to know you'll stand with us. Hell yes, Jake replied immediately. That little girl's one of us now. The others nodded agreement. Whatever came, they'd face it together. The next morning brought unexpected all-eyes. Preacher Johnson arrived with a dozen members of his congregation. Doc Miller came with his medical bag and grim determination. Even some neighboring ranchers showed up, despite the potential cost to their reputations. Word got around, Preacher Johnson explained. Folks don't like the government telling them how to run their families. By noon, nearly 30 people had gathered at the Carter Ranch. They waited in the cold Montana air, breath steaming, watching the horizon for approaching riders. Sheriff Wilson arrived first, accompanied by 2 federal marshals and a stern-faced woman from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Samuel, please don't make this harder than it has to be, Wilson called out. The only thing hard about this is watching good people follow bad orders, Samuel replied. The lead marshal, a thin man with cold eyes, surveyed the gathered crowd. We have federal authority here. Stand aside. No, Samuel said simply. The marshal reached for his weapon, but stopped when he realized he was facing 36 armed and determined people. This wasn't a situation that could be resolved with force. Judge Harrison's carriage appeared on the horizon, moving quickly toward the ranch. When he climbed down, his expression was grave but determined. Marshal Davies, he addressed the federal. Officer, I have an injunction halting any removal of the child pending resolution of the adoption proceedings. Davies' face reddened. On whose authority? Territorial court has jurisdiction over adoption matters. The child stays until legal proceedings are complete. The standoff continued for several more minutes before the federal agents reluctantly withdrew. They'd be back, but for now, Aiyana was safe dot as the crowd dispersed. Aiyana approached Samuel with tears in her eyes. Why did they do that? Stand up for me. Samuel knelt to her level. Because you're family now. And family protects. Family. That evening, official word came that Captain Morrison had been court-martialed and sentenced to prison for his unauthorized raid. Justice for Aiyana's family was finally served. But more importantly, the adoption papers were finalized. Aiyana. Carter was now legally and permanently part of the family that had chosen to love her despite the cost. Chapter 4. New Beginning Spring arrived early in Montana that year, melting the snow and revealing green grass beneath. 6 months had passed since Samuel found Aiyana freezing at the edge of his land, and the transformation was remarkable. The terrified, half-dead child had blossomed into a confident young girl who moved between two worlds with grace. Papa, the horses are ready, Aiyana called, using the name that had come naturally after the adoption. She sat astride her own pony, a gentle mare Samuel had trained specifically for her. Samuel smiled at the sight. Aiyana wore a practical riding dress Martha had sewn, but she'd braided her long black hair in the traditional Apache style her grandmother had taught her. She honored both her heritage and her new life without conflict. Coming, sweetheart, Samuel replied, mounting his own. Horse dot, they rode across the ranch together, checking cattle and mending fences. Aiyana had proven surprisingly capable with ranch work, her small hands quick and sure with rope and tools. More importantly, she seemed genuinely happy for the first time since her rescue. Tell me about the old days again, she requested as they paused to water the horses at the creek. Samuel understood she meant the time before the raid, when her Apache family was still alive. He'd learned that talking about her memories helped her process the grief rather than bury it. Your father was a wise man, Samuel said. He knew you'd need both families, the one you were born to and the one you'd find. Do you think he'd approve of who I'm becoming? I know he would. You're strong like him, but kind like your grandmother. That evening, unexpected visitors arrived at the ranch. Samuel recognized the lead rider immediately. Chief Joseph, the famous Nez Perce leader who'd recently been allowed to return from exile. Behind him rode 3 Apache men, their faces grave but peaceful. We heard about the girl, Chief Joseph said without preamble, about what happened to Running Wolf's band. Samuel tensed, unsure of their intentions. Aiyana is my daughter now, legally adopted. We know, one of the Apache men said. I am Gray Eagle, Running Wolf's brother. I came to see if the child is well. Aiyana emerged from the house, having heard the voices. When she saw Gray Eagle, she ran to him with tears of joy. He lifted her in a fierce embrace, speaking rapidly in Apache. Samuel watched nervously as uncle and niece talked. Finally, Gray Eagle approached him. My brother chose well, he said in careful English. The child is healthy and happy. Her spirit is not broken. I've tried to honor her heritage while giving her a new future." Gray Eagle nodded approvingly. "She tells me you speak of her Apache family with respect, that you let her practice our ways. It's part of who she is." That night, around the fireplace, Gray Eagle shared stories of Aiyana's ancestors. Martha served dinner while Aiyana translated between languages, helping everyone communicate. The cultural bridge she'd become impressed all the adults. "There is something I must tell you," Gray Eagle said to Samuel privately later. "Morrison is dead, killed in prison by other inmates who learned what he did to children." Samuel felt a complex mix of emotions, relief that the threat was gone, but no joy in the violence. "Aiyana doesn't need to know the details," he said. "Agreed. Let her remember justice was served." Before leaving the next morning, Gray Eagle performed a traditional Apache blessing ceremony for Aiyana. He painted symbols on her forehead with clay and spoke words of protection in their ancient language. "You walk between two worlds now," he told her. "This is a great gift and a great responsibility. I understand, Uncle. Your Apache family will always love you. Your white family loves you too. You are blessed twice over." After the Apache delegation departed, life at the ranch settled into new rhythms. Aiyana excelled in the lessons Martha taught her, showing particular aptitude for languages and mathematics. But she also maintained her connection to Apache traditions, teaching Samuel and Martha words from her native tongue. Local attitudes toward the family had gradually shifted. Initially, some neighbors had been suspicious or openly hostile about the adoption. But Aiyana's obvious happiness and the family's integration had won over most critics. The biggest change came when Preacher Johnson asked Aiyana to help teach Apache children who'd been placed with other local families. Soon, she was serving as a cultural interpreter, helping traumatized Apache children adapt while maintaining their heritage. "You're becoming quite the little diplomat," Samuel observed one day, as Aiyana returned from helping another family. "I want to help others like me," she said simply. Children caught between worlds. That summer brought another surprise, a letter from the territorial governor formally commending Samuel and Martha for their humanitarian efforts. The political winds had shifted, and their defiance of federal authority was now viewed as heroic. "Does this mean we're safe?" Aiyana asked when Samuel read the letter aloud. "It means we're family," he replied. "Nothing can change that now." As autumn arrived, bringing the anniversary of Aiyana's rescue, the family reflected on their journey. Together, what had begun as a desperate act of mercy had become something beautiful, a true blending of cultures and hearts. "I had a dream about my Apache family last night," Aiyana confided to Martha as they prepared dinner. "A sad dream?" "No, a happy one. They were smiling and telling me they were proud of who I've become." Martha hugged her tightly. "I'm sure they are, sweetheart." That evening, as they sat by the fire, Aiyana made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I want to become a teacher when I grow up, to help Indian children learn to live in both worlds." Samuel smiled proudly. "That's a worthy goal. I want to build a school here on the ranch, a place where Apache children can learn English and arithmetic, but also keep their traditions." The dream was ambitious, but looking at his determined daughter, Samuel had no doubt she'd achieve it. Aiyana Carter had survived the unthinkable and emerged stronger. She'd found a way to honor her past while embracing her future. Outside, snow began to fall again, marking another Montana winter. But inside the warm ranch house, a family that had been forged by tragedy and strengthened by love prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Aiyana was no longer the freezing, abandoned child Samuel had found at the edge of his land. She was a young woman with purpose, rooted in two cultures and strong enough to bridge any divide. The girl who had been left for dead had not only survived, she had thrived.